Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. This is our Bucky series. This was originally planned to be the first presentation in the series, but I couldn't resist. Struppi showed up and he's done 2 presentations. I reached out to Tom and he said, "Oh, come on over to my studio." So I just went there. And we are going back to Tom's studio again because he's launched his website, which was originally planned for a month. It moved in a day. It became live and it's all available there. So it's been an amazing start to the series. I've been looking at Bucky, and we even read the first chapter of the Tetra Scroll. So it's off to a great start. So what, let me see. I want to tell you what's coming up. It's just amazing series of meetups already planned. So we already had, so this is a big project. This project was launched, this is CJ's idea. CJ wanted to do Bucky-inspired comprehensivity to understand and change the world. And what we tried to do is we tried to reach out to anybody in the Bucky and anybody and everybody in the Bucky universe. And the amazing thing is that CJ gave me this entire list of people to reach out to. And so far, almost everybody has reached out to me. And we have almost 15 meetups lined up just from people reaching out to us. And I still have about 25 to 30 people that CJ wants to be here to come and present. So I will be reaching out to them. But the fact that we have all these names and all these great topics is going to excite everybody to come and add their own thoughts here. So it's going to be a tremendous kind of cross-pollination of Bucky's ideas. I just want to read out the list to you. Struppi started it off with spherical thinking and the ways of the sphere. Then Tom Miller did on liberating modular building from the yoke of the boxes. Struppi came back for spherical thinking the second time. Then today is Daniel talking about Bucky and William Blake. Next week is Peter Myson talking about synergy. On Jan 22nd is John Brett from New Zealand talking about Tetra meme. Then it's Kirby Urner talking about his great deck on dimension and synergetics. Then it's Kurt McNamara. He's a professor who is writing a book on Bucky's comprehensivity, and he's going to be talking about Bucky's comprehensivity in his design. Next is a filmmaker, Christopher Zeloff. He has some amazing footage of Bucky and his inventions. So he's going to be talking about cinematic themes in Bucky. Next is going to be CJ's friend, Doug D.W. Jacobs, and he's going to be talking about Bucky's theme, I am a verb, and applying it to new areas. He knows Bucky very well because he's done this one-man play on Bucky, and he's going to be illustrating that principle. What does it mean to be I am a verb? Then next is Robert Sandusky is going to be here talking about Bucky's design science and the 4 on-ramps that CJ outlined as 4 different ways of approaching Bucky's thought of synergetics. I think this is very relevant because I've kind of tried to have meetups that go across these paths. So the first one is that of design. So we saw the design that Tom Miller did, that Struppi was doing. So you have that design aspect of it. We're going to have Robert talk about it. We also have something on Wednesday. We're spilling over. We're just so many people. Harold Nelson, one of CJ's favorite writers, the author of Design Way, is going to be here on Wednesday at 9 p.m. I've not announced the meetup yet, but I'll be announcing it shortly. And he's going to be talking about his new venture of a design school, where all the design principles, instead of being only for the architects, are available to everybody. So it's a really powerful idea. And I'm delighted that Harold is coming and he's going to be talking about this Wednesday. These 4 ramps. So one is the design, second is geometry, which is a thinking part. The third is this idea of collaboration, of this open collaboration where things come together. Bucky was nothing if not a universalist. He says every person can be a designer, every person can be a philosopher, every person is a human being. And it's the idea of connecting all of these things. And the fourth one is that of integrities, where it appeals to people who are focused on wholeness. And today's presentation, for example, is something that, of William Blake. And this is a good example of that. Everybody is kind of combinations. So for example, what Struppi does is that he brings in this wholeness in various ways. So each person brings in their strengths. It continues on and on. So we're going to do a brainstorm, Bucky brainstorms, featuring Steve Thomas and other people. Next, Rupali Sharma is going to be there along with Ed, who is a big Montessorian, and they're going to be talking about the educational approach of Bucky and connecting that to Montessori. There was actual back and forth between the two. So he's going to be, the Ed has done several, kind of papers and publications on that, the relationship between Bucky and Montessori. So that will be bringing in the educational angle. And then Richard Ramsey is going to be talking about social tensegrity. And this is just for January, February, March. And we've just barely begun, okay? So we are going to do 100 such meetups. And so I invite you, if you're familiar with Bucky, if you would like to present something, if you don't want a full presentation, I have got this special slot of Bucky Brainstorm. Come present a small idea. You can present for 5 to 10 minutes on anything that you want, okay? And then we will brainstorm about that. That's going to be the Bucky Brainstorm idea, and I'll keep doing that at least once a quarter. So we have that if you don't want to go the full hog, but you're welcome to reach out to me. My email address is 52livingideas@gmail.com. That is 52livingideas@gmail.com. All the meetups that we do are available in the Bucky Inspired series on our YouTube channel. Maritza, if you could put the link to just that playlist so you can see everything. In addition to all of these, I keep on doing all kinds of little meetups on tetrahedrons and reading of some Bucky's, tetra scroll and all of that. So all of those are available there. It also includes kind of interviews with different people. So it's much richer than just these meetups. And the whole purpose is to learn about this and connect it to as many things as possible. So that is the project. And welcome, Daniel.
Thank you. Really a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So what we're going to do today is I'm first going to talk to Daniel about his encounter with Bucky. And then he's going to do the presentation on William Blake. It's an amazing presentation. I've seen an early version, the version that he had done that is on YouTube. And we're going to listen to the entire presentation. Then I'm going to invite people to talk about any comments that they have. So please use pen and paper to keep note of anything that you want to say. You'll have plenty of opportunity to express yourself, and then you'll have opportunity to ask questions as well. So it's going to be very interactive. So Daniel, when did you discover, what do you do, and when did you discover Bucky?
Two great questions. Well, I believe I discovered some of Fuller's works in high school. I believe it was Critical Path, which remained with me as an important work, and the absolute whirlwind linguistic style and the way that so many important ideas that were coming up in a contemporaneous way were being forsaged by this author writing in the earlier part of the 1900s, I just found stunning. The way that a global and cosmic, but also personal narrative could be woven together with world knowledge traditions and also formal knowledge structures, also bringing in the materiality of the world and the energy budget that we all use every day. There was just so many incredible threads that every paragraph felt like it was something that could be read quickly as kind of like a end of your life flashing before your eyes moment, or really slowly digested as something that nourishes us. And as to what I do, currently I'm a postdoctoral researcher, and won't be talking as much about that work, but there might be some hints.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now tell me what has reading Bucky and taking in his ideas done for you?
It's partially about the reading. Other features include the, again, physical materiality. While I listen and talk, I spin this brass tet in my hands, and over the years have come also to socially engage and collaborate with people who are also resonating in different ways with sort of the inner direct life and legacy of this one guinea pig bee, but also those who have taken those energetic words and actions and moved them into different areas and different domains that Fuller himself may have wanted but not known of. So it's not the day to day, but it's like dessert or something healthier than dessert, because there's a integrity and a unity and a beauty, as well as a power and a transformational capacity that is so alive in Fuller's work and visualizations and constructions that can't be said to be pervasive in a lot of other contemporary engineering and science work.
Wonderful. So Daniel, shall we get started with the presentation? I want to make sure that there is enough time for people to engage with it, and we want to leave enough time. But please take your time. There is no hurry. Just go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you very much. In the chat is a link to download and cite the slides that I'll be using for those who want to view them. I will be presenting today on William Blake and Buckminster Fuller. Their lives will be placed in juxtaposition, and the overall intention of this agenda is to study comprehensivity. So thanks a lot for this opportunity to 52 Living Ideas and the truly stunning curriculum that you all are co-creating here. Here's the roadmap for today. On the left is the number of slides that each section will be, and then on the right is what the section will contain. We'll begin with a single slide providing some context, a single slide on comprehensivity, and then we'll have a long journey as we juxtapose Blake and Fuller. We'll close with a conclusion and then a discussion slide. So please feel free to write down questions, write them in the chat, which I will have open. So if something makes sense to address in the flow, I will be able to look at it. Otherwise, I'm looking forward to providing this presentation, having a discussion afterwards. So into the presentation we go with the context. So here's the context. On the top left is a picture of our bookshelf at home. The top shelf is Blake and the lower shelf is Fuller. And in both cases, the primary works of these fellows are on the left side, and the secondary works and the latter biographies are on the right side. And this slide is just to show a little bit of the context and background that I'm trying to bring together in this work. On the top right is the Synergetics live streams. So on my own personal YouTube channel, I have done 16 Synergetics live streams so far. 15 of them have been solo, and one has been a discussion with Struppi. And in those live streams, we're exploring the text of Synergetics itself and also reflecting on some related themes. And there's many resources on both of these fellows, which I will try to cite and acknowledge in line. But more generally, with respect to Blake, there are several incredible sites and blogs, especially the Blake Archive and Blake Quarterly, which host contemporary content on William Blake. With respect to Fuller, there's the Buckminster Fuller Institute, BFI. There's, of course, the work of CJ Fearnley. There's the Trim Tab Reading Group, many of whom I see here today, especially the work of Kirby Erner, Kurt McNamara, R.W. Gray and Struppi Pohl. So these are all some great general sources for learning about Blake and Fuller. Here's our epistemic foraging path, making our way between the blue and the red, forging a purple pheromonal trail. And as to the epistemic status, this presentation today, or tonight, it's a draft, linearized snapshot of a very complex juxtaposition presented by a volunteer forager today. It's an ongoing and long-term project, so there's a lot of opportunities to collaborate and extend this work. For example, to go deeper into practices of inquiry and action, to connect with the lives of many other greats, some of whom I've listed here, such as Kandinsky, Goethe, Sri Aurobindo, Krishnamurti, and Friston. Connecting the work with some more formal computational ontologies for Fuller and Blake, as well as active inference, and more broadly to just engage past historical lives and ideas with multimedia affordances of today, as well as areas that under their disciplinary headings have been better known to be philosophical or mathematical, computational, practical, and so on. So that's just some of the context that I'm looking to bring to this intersection today. We're intending and attending tonight to comprehensivity, and comprehensivity will unfold as we participate and engage through time, and in fact over multiple timescales at the very rapid timescales of neuronal action on through these lifelong projects that we engage in and even beyond. So I hope that's something that we can explore more in the discussion tonight, and also in these hundreds of incredible meetings that we'll be joining. But what is comprehensivity? And here I draw from the source, which is Collaborating for Comprehensivity by C.J. Fearnley. And just to read some of the few lines here, comprehensivity is our ability to comprehend our worlds broadly and deeply. It is a facility in questioning, conceptualizing, interpreting, and acting to build a multi-perspectival yet integrated understanding of the world, how it works, and how it changes. It is the quality of our lives that shapes all we have learned in breadth for context and all we have learned in depth for clarity to form, as Buckminster Fuller put it, adequately macro-comprehensive and micro-incisive considerations to better engage our worlds and its peoples with understanding and effectiveness. So that's the appetizer of comprehensivity. And now we're going to jump into the juxtaposition with the context and comprehensivity in mind. The structure of the presentation tonight will be as follows. In the center of each slide are going to be some concordances, points of contact, areas of alignment, provocative connections, or realms of ongoing exploration that can be situated in an overlapping or a connecting space between William Blake and Buckminster Fuller. On the left side will be images, texts, and resources related to William Blake. And on the right side will be images and texts that are related to Buckminster Fuller. At the outset of this juxtaposition, we can ask ourselves questions like, what depth of field or parallax do we gain through juxtaposition? Why not just do two sequential presentations, one on Blake and one on Fuller? And that question, as my colleague Dean reformatted it as, is what is it to ride a bicycle, not just two unicycles? What makes the bicycle different than two unicycles? And to look ahead to some of the discussions we'll have, what is unity and why is it at minimum two? So why are we juxtaposing is one question that we'll continue to investigate, but as to how we're going to juxtapose graphically, it is laid out right here. Let us begin the juxtaposition. In terms of their life and times, William Blake lived corporally between 1757 and 1827, while Bucky Fuller lived from 1895 to 1983. In terms of their location, there were some extreme differences between the two fellows. Blake was born in London, and with the exception of 3 years in a coastal region of southern England, his whole life was spent within London. He really never escaped the southern England area, while Bucky was born in Massachusetts in the USA and engaged in a series of incredible travels around what he called Spaceship Earth, using land, sea, air, and mental travel strategies. Their family lives. Both were involved in a long-term marital relationship. Blake was married with Catherine Boucher in 1782 at the age of 25, and they had a lifelong relationship. And we can see an analogy in the marriage between Bucky Fuller and Anne Hewlett when Bucky was 22. That was also a lifelong relationship. Fuller had 2 daughters, one of whom passed away relatively early, the other who lived a very long life, while Blake did not have children. In terms of their marriage, much more could be said on both, but just to share a couple anecdotes, Catherine wrote of Blake, "I have very little of Mr. Blake's company. He is always in paradise." And there's a great endearing anecdote below where Blake's friend Thomas Butts came to visit them in Lambeth. And Butts was stunned to see the Blakes completely naked, but Blake was unfazed. "Come in," Blake purportedly cried. "It's only Adam and Eve, you know." The Blakes were simply reciting Paradise Lost in character. And as to the relationship of Fuller and Anne, Mr. Fuller once observed, "When 2 people as diametrically different as Anne and I get married, it either cracks up right away or it turns out to be fantastically good the way it has been for us." Now, biographies have been written of both fellows, so to summarize in a couple of lines is a challenge, but William Blake had a very early inclination for the arts. In the ages of around 10 on through his young adulthood, he was trained in some classical crafts, such as drawing and engraving, and he lived an incredibly diligent and prolific, eccentric life of aesthetic and in some ways ascetic production. It was a very humble and challenging life of exhibitions and patronage. Fuller spent his early life in school as well as in the US Navy and performed other work in an industrial capacity. He had a transformative experience when he was 32 and increasingly began to see himself as guinea pig B, experimenting with himself as a bundle of experience. He kept a lifelong chronophile as an archive, which is paralleled by some of the letters and saved documents, unfortunately not all of which were saved of Blake. And I believe it is fair to say that Fuller lived an extravagant life in the sense of Thoreau, who wrote in Walden, "I fear chiefly lest my expression may not be extravagant enough, may not wander far enough beyond the narrow limits of my daily experience, so as to be adequate to the truth of which I have been convinced. Extravagance, it depends on how you are yarded." And that's one of the few quotes that's not directly about Blake or Fuller I'll use. I just thought it was appropriate to hearken to the transcendentalist roots which Fuller shares. And it's just such an incredible quote about extravagance. As to their practices and professionalism, both men sought independence through insight, which we can call inquiry, and creation, which we can call action in their lifelong development. Fuller has a very famous quote, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a model that makes the existing model obsolete." And we see a resonance in the work Jerusalem, the emanation of the giant Albion by Blake, who wrote, "I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's. I will not reason and compare. My business is to create." And something important to note about Blake's work is that while we often quote and copy and paste plain text poetry, it's very important to understand that his work was actually etched and engraved. So here are those 2 lines, "I must create a system," in their original printing from Jerusalem. Now, back to the center. Both Fuller and Blake exhibited craft, skill, commitment, and indeed often reckless professionalism across forms, genres, and communities. So in terms of genres and forms that they both shared, they both engaged in works such as bookmaking, poetry, storytelling, as well as something beyond the mere recitation of stories, but actually the generation of novel myths and mythological systems. They both made extensive marginal annotations in other works as well as in their own works. They both made incredibly diverse visual arts. They wrote, they spoke, they engaged in both mass and personal communications. They built long-term relationships, and they built up their physical spaces in terms of workshops, classrooms, and domestic surroundings. Some of the highlights of Fuller's works and contributions in terms of paradigms, themes, and memes, we can point to synergetics and tensegrity, 4D time lock, anticipatory design science, Dymaxion and geodesic architectures, a wealth of patents, new words, and also a strong focus on processes and constructions related to every area of domestic and just general living, such as cars, houses, and so on. Everything that he put under the umbrella of livingry to contrast it with weaponry. Blake engaged also in music, which was apparently spontaneous and due to the times was never recorded. He engaged primarily through visual media methods, including drawings and woodcuts, which have a very interesting opposition to one another in terms that in one art form, the mark of the instrument is dark in the final print, and in the other, the mark of the instrument is a relief. It is actually light in the final instrument. And he also invented or developed his own method called relief etching today, but he referred to it as the illuminated printing or infernal method. And this was quite an interesting method. He used an acid-resistant liquid and drew and wrote, composing directly onto the copper plate with brushes and quill pen. When the acid-resistant liquid dried and hardened, the plate would be exposed to acid, which etched away the uncovered parts of the copper. Because printing always reverses the design, the text had to be written backwards and slanted appropriately in order to appear the right way round when printed. So when looking at some of these drawings and visual works by Blake, they were created in a way just as we would draw on a page, but it's also really interesting to consider how many of these works actually were created in reverse. And here's a quotation from The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, work by Blake. First, the notion that man has a body distinct from his soul is to be expunged. I shall do this by printing in the infernal method by corrosives, which in hell are salutary and medicinal, melting apparent surfaces away and displaying the infinite which was hid. So he's actually imbuing and referencing his own practice and protocol within this extremely elaborate mythological or narrative context that is captured in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell and in future work. As to the generativity of these fellows, what can we say about it? Well, they were both deeply generative. On the left side, there are some cues and clues to the generativity of Blake, primarily referencing here the William Blake Archive and the Blake Quarterly. The Blake Archive is a very high quality resource that captures many of the works of Blake himself, and it contains just absolutely thousands of works that Blake made for himself as well as was commissioned to make for others. The Blake Quarterly is a publication that continued and continues on with modern scholarship on Blake. And not just are there many renditions of the complete poetry and prose of William Blake, but also there's even such things as a Blake dictionary to capture these references. Sometimes it's just a name that pops up one time in the Blake corpus. Other time there are themes that weave themselves again and again through the work, and there are just these strange names. They're biblical, they're from the Old Testament or the New Testament, they're from England, they're from his own imagination, they're from all these different sources that are being woven together in Blake's work. Fuller, as many may know, also had an extremely deep generativity, and it's represented in a few different ways. One is the sheer fundamental documentation of the work in terms of what he called the Dymaxion chronophile. And Fuller's chronophile contained many, many pieces of paper, film, audio, video recordings. It's currently being stewarded at Stanford University. And the chronophile is like a quantified self or a documented self that Fuller engaged in. And as this screenshot from the BFI shows, there are books by Fuller and about him. There are articles by and about him, and there are patents as well as the physical constructions. So Fuller also has this incredible legacy of many, many products, and also a legacy of those who care, who continue to steward what he created. I'll also point towards Synergetics, which was a collaboration with Fuller and E.J. Applewhite. And Synergetics is where we see some of the most distilled formal representations of Fuller's work, which is an area that Blake's work points towards but does not engage with for a variety of reasons that are pretty apparent. And I'll point also to, like we saw the Blake dictionary, we see a Synergetics dictionary. And so here, the Synergetics dictionary on the R.W. Gray website. And we see an incredible variety of secondary sources, such as here of grunch.net and grunch.net, which hosts all these links so we can see the, again, continued tradition of those who are working in the ways of Fuller and those who are working in the ways of Blake. Their generativity was not just deep, prolific, and lifelong, but to be very specific, we can say that it was a full page creativity. And that's both literal and symbolic. Both fellows were keenly interested in the entire process from generation of ideas, implementation of ideas, and publication and communication of the ideas. And a strategy that they both aligned upon was that they worked on the full page. So again, calling back to this really exhortation to remember that Blake's work is not just copy and paste plain text, but it's rather inscribed on these incredible illuminated pages. Here we see just a small sampling of poetry and cover pages and illustrations that Blake made. And analogously, I could have chosen from similarly thousands for Fuller. We see these full page representations that Fuller made. Fuller's include text visualization like Blake, and also Fuller works with a lot of full page representations that include geometric and formal mathematical content. So both Blake and Fuller worked with the integrity of the full page, and in various ways they even spoke as much about it. It's also quite interesting to think about how full page and intermodal creativity is in some ways like a watermark or a cryptographic signature against the corruption of the content of the transmission. So somebody can copy out the text, which is actually quite complicated in Blake's case because of the capitalization and punctuation, all these different features which he used, and as well as just the challenge of structuring text that might be all over the page. You can't necessarily put it into a .txt file. And so both ensured intentionally and unintentionally that their work was transmitted in the original through this holistic encoding across the full page. Who was the audience for Blake and Fuller? Well, it was everyone. They were both truly communicating to all, but we can highlight that they both communicated with children. They both highlighted the accessibility of their ideas for children, children in age and children in spirit, and all learners. So first is a true crossover moment. In the preamble to Synergetics, E.J. Applewhite wrote, "On the opening page of Synergetics, Fuller exhorts the reader, dare to be naive. Similarly, in speaking, he tended to address professors as if they were 9-year-olds and 9-year-olds as if they were professors. This is a strategy that was anticipated by William Blake, who, quote, liked to think that his works were perfectly comprehensible to the innocent, to minds not blunted by education and fashion, especially children." And Fuller really built upon this thread in works such as An Educational Revolution is Upon Us and Every Child is Born a Genius. Of children, he wrote, I observe that every child demonstrates a comprehensive curiosity. Children are interested in everything and are forever embarrassing their specialized parents by the wholeness of their interest. And in terms of works to pursue about Fuller's relationship and care for children, we can point to Tetra Scroll, which is a document and work I know that you all have discussed here on 52 Living Ideas. It's a mythology or a story that's told with Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And that's quite symbolic and deep because the Three Bears story is told in this sort of strangely observerless way that facilitates an understanding of the planar triangle as fundamental. When we move into the fourth space, we have the observer of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. We move into the tetrahedral space. Also, Fuller's Earth is a very endearing work about a day spent with Buckminster Fuller and the kids. So that's a great work that we discussed in the Trim Tab group. In terms of Blake, I'll quote from the hypertext. Blake certainly had a wonderfully tender heart for children. He was a peerless child advocate who, through his poetry and visual art, called for his fellow Englishmen to see and respond to the plight of children forced to work long, grueling, hazardous hours, providing virtual slave labor to unscrupulous businessmen. Among major writers, perhaps only Charles Dickens rivals Blake as an illustrator of the plight of orphans and street urchins. No great poet ever wrote more compassionately or more frequently about children than William Blake. And another quote from another author was, the glorification of childhood is a dominant romantic feature of Blake's poetry. In his poems, child is a figure symbolizing God or Christ. His world of innocence, however, is not entirely untouched by unpleasant elements. That is reflected with the dialectic that he built through many works, but is best represented with his work, Songs of Innocence and Experience, showing the two contrary states of the human soul. And in this work, there's a dramatization and a symbolization of innocence and experience, where the innocent poetry is as zippity-doo-dah as you could write it at the time, and the experiential poetry has some extremely dark elements. But both, in summary, spoke explicitly and implicitly to children, which hopefully can continue to resonate to this present day as we consider the importance of education in building our future. Moving into a bit more of the conceptual materials, both authors paid keen attention to visual and symbolic symmetries in thought, history, biology, and truly everything. So starting with Fuller, here I've drawn from the Synergetics Index by R.W. Gray. And we can see just from a quick search of where symmetry is literally used, we see just absolutely dozens of related terms and usages of symmetry, ranging from the most physical to the most metaphysical interpretations or situatings of symmetry that one could imagine. And to give a flavor for what synergetics sounds like and some of the core ideas that often contrast or diverge quite seriously from our cubocentrism today, here's from Synergetics 611.01. If the system's openings are all triangulated, it is structured with minimum effort. There are only three possible omnisymmetrical, omnitriangulated, least effort structural systems in nature. They are the tetrahedron, octahedron, and icosahedron. And here we have a classic grunch.net visualizations of the quantal volumes of some of those shapes. Symmetry was very clearly important for Fuller, who is always seen by those who know as a strongly geometric thinker. But symmetry actually plays quite an interesting role in Blake's work. One of Blake's most famous lines is, "Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry?" And here's what that line or stanza looks like in the illuminated text. Many Blake scholars actually have dove into this so incredibly deeply and kind of disparaged the unserious face on this tiger, but it's quite a beautiful drawing. And fearful symmetry, coming from this stanza, was used as the title of a very classic work of Blake scholarship, which was A Study of William Blake by Northrop Frye. And that idea of fearful symmetry and also the tiger from this poem lives on through various works. So here we have by the scientist A.Z., Fearful Symmetry, The Search for Beauty in Modern Physics, as well as Quark and the Jaguar by Murray Gell-Mann, and Symmetry and Complexity. So many areas, such as Fuller's synergetics, but also Haken's synergetics, study symmetry. And we see a very strong inclination towards understanding symmetry and breaks from symmetry in Blake's work. And also Stephanie Vest has written a great piece, Don't Fear the Symmetry, the Poetry of William Blake. So symmetry, and really these lines in particular, are often used as entry points for the work of Blake. We can go beyond mere symmetry and talk about one particular symmetry, and that is the fourfold vision. Both Blake and Fuller used a fourfold mnemonic to summarize systems, both physical and cognitive systems, in terms of their unified while compositional geometric nature. Now, I'll begin with a nod towards the excellent work of 52 Living Ideas, who have featured this fourfold vision approaching from the Fuller side, for example, exploring dynamics, unity, and the interactions of tetrahedrons or quart orbs, as well as a lot of other ongoing Fuller-related discussions, such as those by Struppi and others. And also on 52 Living Ideas channel, we've heard recently from The Fourfold Vision and Age of Imagination with Yasuhiko Kimura, New Spirituality of the Future, and Fourfold Vision, Why, What, How, and Who, and Exploration. So there's been great work on the Fourfold Vision. I constrained myself to only one slide per area of juxtaposition. This, like all the others, is one that could really be unpacked so much. With respect to Fuller, the tetrahedron was at the core of synergetics. I'm a pluralist in many respects, and I'm open to people who want to call a tet or otherwise, but I'll call it a tet for now. The tet is the minimum space enclosing system. It's omni-triangulated, which means all of the sides are structurally supported with a triangle. And one of the most essential moves in synergetics, or in Martian math, as Kirby calls it, is that the tet has an edge length of 1 and a volume of 1. In the cubic world, we have the cube at the heart of the system with an edge length of 1 and a volume of 1. And so there's a slight rescaling of volume that comes into play. And we also see other manifestations of the fourfold vision, such as this idea, which actually Struppi has placed a variant in the chat, 1 + 1 is 4, or another variant on that sort of elusive mathematics is 1 + 1 + 1 = 1. You have 4 things that come together to make one thing. And actually in both the decomposition of the tetrahedron into the 2 zigzags, which Kurt and others have studied, as well as the compositionality of the tet into its vertexes, edges, faces, and volume, in both of those pathways, we see this ability to integrate across scales, what Dean calls scale-friendly rather than scale-free. And we can also point towards even the earliest work of Fuller with 4D time lock. Martian math and the School of Tomorrow are some ongoing efforts by Kirby, Erner, and others that bring this type of tet-centric thinking and everything else aligned with it into a really modern and computational context. Now, as to the fourfold vision of Blake, a true I don't know whether to call it a cemetery or a forest or what, of books and dissertations have been written on the fourfold vision of Blake. In fact, so much that it liberates the reader to just have their own fun and personal interpretation, because the actual scholarship would be lifelong just to follow up on some of these rich connections. And amidst that comprehensive contribution and layout that we all have been gifted with from the past, it, in my perspective, really frees us up to just enjoy and have fun with these connections rather than worry that we're representing what Blake said or what somebody else said about Blake. But the fourfold vision manifests many times in Blake's work, and this presentation with Yasuhiko Kimura really points to some of those, but other works we can point to. There's the line, "Four mighty ones are in every man, a perfect unity cannot exist but from the universal brotherhood of Eden, the universal man, to whom be glory evermore. Amen." And Albion is a character that Blake uses to represent the cosmic, undifferentiated, and pre-fall from grace of the cosmic man. Not speaking in a gendered context, just saying it as Blake said it. And in that way, we can see Albion as the Tet. So here's from Ram Horned blog. Albion has a composite character second to none. It means originally England, but at a deeper level, it means the cosmos, which is a man. In this, Blake agrees with the Adam Kadmon of the Kabbalah, the heavenly man of Philo, St. Paul's heavenly man, the second Adam, and the cosmic man of Gnostic mythology, and the Hindu god Krishna. So Albion is the pre-differentiated, pre-fall, pre-partitioned holism, which the fall is something mythological that happens over multiple timescales. There's the fall during childhood of innocence and experience. There's the fall within each moment as we learn, which is both an honor and a blessing, but also there's a tragedy to learning. The fall is also something that's symbolically represented in the Bible and has therefore this cosmic character. So some other points on Blake and the fourfold vision. So here's a work by Marcelo Gorman, The Fourfold Visions of William Blake and Martin Heidegger, and a very interesting work by David Groves, Blake, Thomas Boston, and the Fourfold Vision. So Groves wrote, "The word fourfold or fourfold, hyphenated or not, you choose, appears many times in Blake's longer poems and is clearly one of his favorite expressions. Probably the best known example occurs in his letter to Thomas Butts. Now I a fourfold vision see, and a fourfold vision is given to me. 'Tis fourfold in my supreme delight, and threefold in soft blue as night. And twofold always may God us keep from single vision and Newton's sleep." Now, I sometimes like to think about this in terms of the Tet. So the single vision is only seeing one side of the Tet. And when you only see one side of the Tet, you might believe that the planar triangle, which has no actual corporal existence, is the fundamental. And so Newton's sleep, the sleep of rationalism, or Urizen, who's a character in Blake's mythology, the sleep is the sleep of this sort of unbalanced abstractionalism that leads one to accept a planar basis for what we all understand to be a co-created, multi-perspectival, and embodied space-time. The twofold vision is looking at the Tet such that only two sides are visible. And in that case, one can still see something like a rectangle. The threefold vision is the ability to see three sides of the Tet. The threefold vision is this soft cosmic view, and fourfold is supreme delight, because we actually can never see four sides of the Tet. So with synergetics, not only do we embody this multi-perspectival reality where everything is happening from its own center of attraction and radiation, gravity and radiation, but also there's this plurality even within the kernel that we can never truly see even all sides of the kernel. We can't see four sides of the vision. And Groves goes on to write, The word fourfold can be found twice in the 1611 Bible and once in Paradise Lost, which is the work by Milton. But its frequent use by Blake is very striking. Contemporary readers may have detected an echo of Thomas Boston's book Human Nature in its Fourfold State, a popular work of theology which went through at least 24 editions in Britain between 1720 and 1800. And this is kind of like classic Blake scholarship for those who choose to dabble, which is like one line or like disparate marginal annotations and lines get woven together into a social context and a very socially rich context that can also include the letters that Blake wrote and the books that he wrote in and wrote about, the people who he spoke to. So it's like this endless space where people enrich and augment terms that Blake might have used one time, or he might have used them like all the time, but then those terms gain context and grounding in kind of this isotropic vector matrix of richness. All right. Moving past the fourfold vision into one particular realization of symmetry, which is the extremely, at first subtle, but later blatant and central difference between negation and contradiction. So both Blake and Fuller worked within a logical paradigm that was both learned and generated that distinguished between negation and contradiction. They went beyond a mere logical interpretation of the difference between negation and contradiction into an embodied and elaborated mythology that was truly a system of their own. Again, speaking to the very earliest of Blake striving with systems to free individuals from those systems and Fuller wanting to make something that worked for everybody. So what is the difference between negation and contradiction? Let's hear it from how they said it. Blake in Jerusalem wrote, "Negations are not contraries," which is hilarious because that is itself a negation. "Contraries mutually exist, but negations exist not." Also a negation. So extremely densely woven text. Negations are created linguistically by just appending not to something, but contraries mutually exist. So the basis of a negation is the non-existence of what is negated, whereas contraries are unity is plural and at minimum two, like concave and convex. They're contrary, but they always come into existence at the same time, whereas negations are not contraries. And this is from the Marriage of Heaven and Hell. "Without contraries is no progression. Attraction, repulsion, reason and energy, love and hate are necessary to human existence." And this work, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, is an immensely complex, but also accessible and sometimes even satirical and LOL funny work because it's so bizarre and wide-ranging. How is marriage related to this question of negation and contradiction? So Russell Prather wrote in William Blake and the Problem of Progression, 2007. The paper begins by considering Blake's appropriation of the term contraries and its limitations in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. It then focuses on a short passage at the beginning of the four Zoas that extends the marriage twofold conception of contraries into a fourfold complement of contraries and subcontraries, four possibilities, hashtag TET, that the passage, disregarding the basic rules of logic, syndocically embraces. Basic rules of knowledge were in a modern logical context that includes various advanced or non-Boolean logics. So actually, this is absolutely compatible with logic. And here we see a visualization of what contradictions and subalternations are. So this is an example of the kind of work that points towards formal logical interpretations of Blake's work, which read qualitatively and on the page can just be like stepping into kind of like an opera or a sweeping drama, often painted with these soft watercolors. But Blake wrote of the wiry bounding line and the line is what differentiates one thing from another. So actually there is this heart of formality in Blake's work, but it's not always clear to see. And so he didn't necessarily have the bandwidth or the skill set to draw it out, but that's why I believe it's such an important area to do so. Fuller also differentiated, sometimes using these words, but also different words, negations and contradictions. So here's Synergetics 445.11. At eternal outset, the vector equilibrium's frequency, which is shown here, is non-none, which is inactive, which is different in meaning from non-existence. Zero is the inside-out phase of conceptual integrity. It is the internal complementation of system. Quite the contrary to non-existence, it means only eternally existence in contrast to temporally existent. And here in Everything I Know, which is a long form, what today could have been a live stream by Fuller, he said, I found there is what you call a multiplicative 2 and an additive 2. There was an additive 2 of the poles for every system in the universe. There was also a multiplicative 2 because there's a concave and a convex. There's an inherent duality of this congruence of an inside system because concave and convex are not the same. So there is something terribly exciting going on here. It is terribly exciting. All right, final slides. I'll move through pretty rapidly so we can get to the discussion, but there's also a lot here. In terms of perception, cognition, and action, both Blake and Fuller pursued lifelong development and skillful use of their physical, social, and cognitive niche. They both took a cosmic and a dual exoteric perspective on the function and meaning of human life and sense-making. Like, they threw the fastball right down the middle. If you can see it, and if you can see it, can you hit it? And if you can hit it, can you run? Because the way they communicated was so blatant, but also deep and meaningful. They were very aware and attentive and respectful towards historical and global traditions and practices of inquiry and action from their own heritages in the Anglo-American traditions, but also from world knowledge traditions, which is so important. And they situated their work expertly and explicitly in relationship to past, present, and future colleagues, which is sometimes hilarious to read as they disparage past or contemporary authors. And I believe that they, in their work, find resonance with modern trends towards a gentle realism, embodied, embedded, enacted, extended, and affective cognitive science, active inference in the free energy principle, another day for that one, and also systems and complexity, which I know some here on this call have worked on. So first, Fuller in terms of perception, cognition, action. One amazing work that we read in TrimTab was Mark Wigley's Buckminster Fuller Inc., Architecture in the Age of Radio. He always insisted that the real site of architecture is the electromagnetic spectrum. And he wrote, since the initial publication of the chart of the electromagnetic spectrum, humans have learned that what they can touch, smell, see, and hear is less than 1/millionth of reality. We're in the 400 to 700 nanometer space, but our generative model in active inference terms can be so much richer. And that's actually forsaged by Blake, who wrote, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite, which was used as the title of Aldous Huxley's book, Doors of Perception. And this line actually follows directly in The Marriage in Heaven and Hell from his description of the infernal method. So he was using this acid corrosive printing to cleanse the doors of perception. And there's some incredible scholarship, such as Blake and the Mark of the Cognitive, William Blake's Integral Psychology, reading Blake and Ken Wilber together, another minimum of 2. And also there's an amazing thread to be drawn out with Marshall McLuhan, who talked about William Blake's sense ratio. And we have, of course, McLuhan and Bucky hanging out, talking about communication. Amazing. Their worldview. Well, what could be said about worldview? I chose to interpret it literally. How did they actually view the world? They both emphasized the extreme physicality, but also extreme metaphysicality and the constraints and affordances of our brain and body, in some ways exalting our sense-making process as embodied in its actuality, but also seeing it as part of a bigger picture. They both took a very authentic perspective on history and understandings of people and ideas. And so they swerved in and out of their lane, talking about human history and the way that people were born and the way that we evolved, developed, or were created. And in doing so, they developed these very deep fractal mythologies that were at the personal, national, global, and cosmic scales. In reading Fuller and Blake, the tone can be extremely ambiguous. Are they making prophecy? Are they predicting something? Are they exhorting? Are they remembering? What are they really doing with what they say and do? They also had a very critical yet visionary perspective on the relationship between human and our technological ecosystem. So the satanic mills of Blake and Fuller's emphasis on the transition from weaponry to livingry. And broadly, we can say that they integrated their ways of living and their ways of viewing the world into their broader work, practices, and skills at different times and different ways. And so here on the right side, we see the Dymaxion map of Fuller, which is a non-distorting presentation, one that I have in my room on the wall. And we have Blake, who's referring in Milton to some incredible cognitive ways of framing what might be understood as the spherical versus flat earth dialectic. And he talks about how the microscope knows not of this nor the telescope. They alter the ratio of the spectator's organ but leave objects untouched. For every space larger than a red globule of man's blood is visionary. Like when you're looking through a microscope or a telescope, you're still in your own zoom in, zoom out bounds, but you're seeing something and you're imagining it to be smaller or larger. And so that is actually this extended cognitive perspective that they both had. And they didn't just want to view the world, they wanted to actually improve it. So Blake wrote, striving with systems to deliver individuals from those systems. And Fuller famously wrote that a goal was to make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without ecological offense or the disadvantage of everyone. That is the critical path. Final few slides. As to their faith and traditions, they both had very deep and personal, as well as family scale faith traditions, and they had complex and meaningful generative relationships with Christianity, as well as other faith and belief traditions. So this is one of Blake's final works, the Lao Koan. Maybe there's another way to say it. It includes many different languages, and it speaks to that challenge of trying to make the plain text Blake.txt. It just can't happen from this. And so that is how we ensure the integrity of the artistic transmission. And he made many illustrations of his own design and under commission of the Bible and other inspired works. Fuller also had this kind of interactive, interpretive relationship with Christianity and other world knowledge traditions. He wrote, my task was not to preach about God, but to serve God in silence about God. He wrote, no more secondhand God. And he wrote, ever rethinking the Lord's Prayer, which was like a lifelong work in progress that rewrote the Lord's Prayer. And he wrote, here's God's purpose. For God, to me, it seems, is a verb, not a noun, proper or improper. Very famous Fuller quote. So as we close, we'll leave it to them for the closing words. On Fuller's gravestone, we see, call me Trim Tab. The epithet so nice he had to engrave it twice because it's written on the bottom and on the top. So above even his own life and relationship, we see the eminence of Call Me Trim Tab, which is the rudder that moves the rudder. It's like the second order cybernetics, and it's the genesis of action in a complex world. Blake's gravestone says, poet, artist, prophet. I give you the end of a golden string, only wind it into a ball. it will lead you in at heaven's gate, built in Jerusalem's wall. And that is a quote from the section in Jerusalem called To the Christians. Let us move to the conclusion. So, when we're talking about William Blake and Bucky Fuller, as we sometimes might want to do, there are very complex and rewarding similarities, divergences, and resonances. There are many possible perspectives to take on this juxtaposition, and there's also many salient paths of inquiry and action. The slides are downloadable and citable at the link in the DOI shown here. This is an early communication of a pretty complex project, so anyone who wants to work in this area, let us do it. And here are some fun Stable Diffusion images that were generated, a drawing of William Blake in the style of Bucky Fuller and a drawing of Bucky Fuller in the style of William Blake. And there's a lot of other fun ones that we made. It's time now for the discussion. So here's how the discussion can proceed. We can go back to one of these previous areas of juxtaposition, those slides that we looked at. We could talk about context, comprehensivity, or the conclusion, or we could start a new juxtaposition, or we could do something else. So thank you, and onwards.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Daniel. This is wonderful. So what I want to do, folks, is that first I'm going to invite people who know Bucky very well to talk about what they thought of this. Just comments. You can do it at length if you want. You can make it very short if you want. Go ahead and type exclamation mark. We'll have comments first, just general impressions of what you got, and then we'll go to questions. So first, look forward to anybody who wants to comment of what did you guys think? So go ahead and type exclamation mark in the chat, or you can raise your hand in Zoom, whatever you prefer. All right, so we're going to start with Kirby. Kirby, go ahead. Just a second. I want to make sure you can unmute. Hold on. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm good. Like a few times ago, I'm on different technology. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you look different though, Kirby, but go ahead.
You mean my icon, right?
Yes, yes.
Just real quick, that's you could call it the coat of arms of the Erner family. It's a Swiss canton. In other words, Switzerland breaks up into states, and one of them is called Uri, U-R-I, and anybody from there is called an Erner. So and this is a different Zoom account than I usually use, yes. Anyway, I just wanted to say, I've been tracking Daniel and listening to his things mostly asynchronously. I think I was in on one of those live streams talking a little bit, but this is the first time I've really gotten his full, the depth of his scholarship on all of this. And I'm very, very impressed and very, very happy about it. I'm glad you're getting it recorded. That was a great talk. I just want to kind of do a little mini standing ovation all by myself and then sit down and let other people talk.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Kirby. Really appreciate that. And it was certainly, I really like the slides. There's just so much there. So I look forward to going through it again, looking at the slides, and thank you. Next up is Bobby. Bobby, go ahead.
Thank you so much for what you created there. I loved it. And I thought that it brought to life that these two figures that in isolation are larger than life, they become brought to a scaling function of each other's contextualizations, both symmetries and paradoxes. And I love that because it felt like we were able to bring ourselves into scale for figures who are always out of scale. And I think that that was context and salience that I just have a great deal of gratitude for. Thank you so much for creating what you did here.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next up is going to be Richard. Folks, just go ahead and type an exclamation mark in order to share. Anybody now, it's open for anybody who wants to talk about what they got from the presentation. Go ahead, Richard.
Well, I just want a big shout out to Daniel for this presentation, and having been around him in various times in our Trim Tab book club. It's just fascinating to hear this and what he has done with the work of the two men. And for me, it adds to another fourfold addition to the many that people can be aware of. I mentioned the other day about William Merwin Thompson talking about the fourfoldness of the evolution of organizations and cultures, and those who know Jung know the fourfoldness of his work. So it just really eye-opening and expanding. When we get to the discussion of ontology, I'm intrigued with how the work of David Bohm and his notion of divided and undivided universe is something that is an ontological sort of issue that has certainly been affecting me in my life and my work in a university, for people to shift from the divided worldview to an undivided worldview and have that become more of a foundation than the contemporary worldviews that we have now that accent separation. So again, thank you very much, Daniel. That was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Next up is going to be Morris, Struppi, Ella, and Robert. Morris, go ahead.
Yeah, Daniel, I missed everything, but I know the love and the spirit that you have behind it all. And I was thinking, it's like, what do I bring into this? Not having seen anything. And I was thinking, driving here, about where was the moment where Bucky and Blake overlapped for me? And it was at the moment when I read Bucky saying, "You are a tremendous bundle of experience." And I think that is extremely profound. I don't know what to say, but immediately life has value. My life has value at that moment. And it's mystical. You know, it's just this mystical thing that is worthy of just focusing on and meditating on the beauty of that statement. So anyway, that's the only thing that I have to offer. And thank you again for doing this and bridging these wonderful men.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Morris. Morris, I have good news. This is going to be on our YouTube channel, 52 Living Ideas. So you can go ahead and watch it, and you can watch it in slow motion, so you can read all the slides at the same time. So it's amazing thing, this YouTube, you know, you can slow things down. I have friends who speak at 3 times the speed of human beings, and they usually listen to everything at 5 times, 5x speed. But there are people, you know, they're in context, it's worth listening to things, you know, at a slower speed, so you can go through everything. Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Struppi, Ella, Robert, and Maritza. Struppi.
Yeah. Thank you, Daniel. Again, as always, I enjoy your presentations a lot, and I love the density that your slides are like fractals, and I think that's a nice way of using them. And there was one particular, let's call it that I found particularly interesting when you were showing your brass TED, and you spoke of these different kinds of vision, the less than fourfold vision of Blake. And I was thinking, you know, yeah, your demonstration was on point. However, if we're actually looking at a lower frequency 4 eyes, lower than the facet eye that you have where you can't look through, then it actually is a different matter, because, you know, if we're looking into 1 eye, we're looking out of 3. If we're looking into 2 eyes, we're looking out of 2. We could also be looking into 3 out of 1. I hope I didn't just say that. It's a bit confusing maybe. And I just figured there's also ways in which we could look into 2 out of 1, or indeed into 1 out of 1. So, you know, perhaps there's something there, because this notion of the cosmic view, perhaps, I don't know if it was that what Blake called it, but this perspective that allows us to kind of transcend the lower, rather abstract dimensions where we seem to only see this little bit of the whole. Maybe there is a lot more to be seen when we allow the whole to be hollow, you know, to be something that we can follow through and recognize that what goes in one way may come out a few more than one. And there's such beauty in this, always this, you spoke to the, not the contrast, the,
The contrary and negation.
The contrary, exactly, where the contrariness is also this complementarity, you know, where anything that is one on one side is the other on the other side, right? And then there is one another somewhere in between the two. And it's just so beautiful to be able to recognize that we don't have to diminish one on behalf of the other. We don't have to ignore one on behalf of the other. We don't have to indeed separate anything if we recognize boundaries to be binding two sides together rather than dividing them apart. And I think there is a lot of that beauty within your contemplations and constellations of these two minds. And thank you. I want to say thank you for that.
Thank you, Struppi. And it's really fascinating for me that the way in which William Blake brings these four things together has a very different quality to it. It is a more kind of, there is a very deep psychological depth he has in everything he talks about. And it is a very interesting, whereas Bucky comes at it from the more kind of sensory, what you can see, and thinking angle. Whereas, you know, if I want to use Jung's terms, both are coming to the same unity and fourfoldness, but they're slightly different angles. So it's like he's coming from like thinking and acting or kind of physical world, whereas this guy is coming, Blake is coming from like intuitive and feeling world. But both of them are really good at those other two, like at thinking. He's, you know, Blake is amazing. And at creating physical things, he's amazing too. Similarly, Bucky, you know, though he starts in some ways, he has, I mean, his intuitions are amazing. And he is able to, his feelings, though they are like the underlying feeling of this openness and wanting to embrace the whole world and to basically do good for everybody on earth, that is there as a very large ocean in him. So it is wonderful that they start from different angles, but they achieve the whole in their own way. And each has this inimitable, they are inimitable wholes. Like they have a wholeness which is all their own as an individual human beings. So it's just amazing. Thank you. Next up is going to be, let's see, it's going to be Ella, Robert, Maritza, and Rupali. Ella.
Yes, I totally agree. Each one of them is each their own person. They're extremely imaginative, and they have their own values, their own spirit, and they take the risk of, I think, being who they are, as one does in society at large. They're risk takers in their own way. And at times what I do think Jung is very similar to Blake in many ways. They're both very imaginative. They write in imaginative ways from the unconscious perspective, and they both illustrate. Jung illustrated his ideas in the Red Book, which is beautiful. A lot of his illustrations are very unusual, like Blake's. So I saw a lot of comparisons between Jung and Blake. And I think with Blake, he, in his writings, his poetry, he expresses the annihilation of self and regeneration of the individual, very much like Carl Jung did after Blake did, because Carl Jung follows Blake, actually. And Blake talks about confronting the shadow, the archetypes of the unconscious, the anima and the animus. And of course, those are Carl Jung's ideas, but Blake talks about them in his poetry. And so I just wanted to make those conclusions. I think Bucky is, wow, it's just such, they're all just individuals expressing who they are. And that's always at risk. And I just appreciate that with both of them. Wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ella. Thank you. I mean, I think that's like what it means to be a human being. You know, it's like this independent, authentic beings engaging life and the world in the fullest way possible. That's what both of them did. Wonderful. Next up is Robert, Maritza, and Rupali. Robert.
Technology. I'm here. Kudos on the slides. They are both, well, they're Bucky. No, they're Bucky Fuller-esque. And fortunately, I've captured them on the machine. Now, the machine may not let me ever see them again, but they're there. But I have a question. It's not related to the whole thing, but are there any analysis that you've made or have regarding the two in discussions of educational systems like schools, etc.?
Go ahead, Daniel.
Thank you. It's a very important question. Fuller, I believe, has written and thought and enacted much more on that, generating the more storybook like Tetrascroll, as well as focusing on these experiences that are captured in the day with the kids and education automaton, thinking about like what would remote connectivity do for education. So he thought a lot more about it, but he did not spend most of his time developing early childhood curriculum per se, but many following did. Now, Blake had a very symbolic relationship with both parentage and children because he didn't have any of his own, and nor was he like a school teacher. And so he almost engaged with children in the abstract and did more to point at the issues of education and work of children rather than, I believe, necessarily point to solutions. So I think they both point to the future and the wide open space of holistic education. Bucky discoursed more positively in that direction, whereas Blake is kind of like a North Star of like the sacred nature of childhood and left it, like so many other topics, more of a riddle with how we would actually implement that kind of a sacred education.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Maritza, followed by Rupali and Mike. Maritza.
Hi, I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you for that. I have to say so William Blake is one of the proponents for the idea of poet as prophet, which I absolutely love the concept. We see it also in different things like Bible and such. And it's fascinating. What is fascinating to me here is that by making a juxtaposition between Blake and Fuller, we're also intimating that we have, a man of the world such as Fuller also could be prophet. Yes, because he has so many similarities with William Blake that we could make that kind of leap. So I kind of, on a light note, I find that to be delightful. From a perspective of maybe slight more seriousness, I will say I did not realize that the fourfold paths mentioned in William Blake's poetry and works and art could be so easily related and put into the conceptions of the tetrahedron that we have been discussing. So I just think that's fascinating. I need to read or I will probably go through the slides again on my own time to process a little more, but I thank you for making that. And it's a lot of people make this assumption that poetry in today's modern society has become less relevant. So seeing this is really heartwarming because it does, show that that's not necessarily true. Where we were seeing through Blake, he was showing to us he shows how the spiritual and the material, they can walk together. They don't necessarily need to be separate and indistinct. And somebody had put in the chat that that perhaps Fuller was not so he wasn't very symbolic, or I forget the verbiage, apologies, but the idea was that Blake was perhaps more emotion invoking. But I will say, if you actually listen to some of Fuller's presentations, the depth of emotion that is felt with reading some of William Blake's works can be seen in the energy that is expressed when Fuller gets very much into explaining some of his conceptualizations. So I can see the energy there. They're both putting forth. It comes through that something else they have in common that we can juxtapose is this innate, deep, abiding desire to bring forth these tenets that they believe out towards us, and not just bring them out, but to do it in a way that achieves communication, the concept of getting it out there for others to internalize themselves. And that's kind of been a concept harder to maybe vocalize, but seeing your slides here, Daniel, makes that so clear to me. So I just wanted to express that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. Next up is Rupali. And Rupali, if you, after making whatever comment you want to make, if you want to comment on the educational ideas of Bucky, Fuller, would appreciate that. But Rupali is going to be doing a full presentation on the topic. But if you could do it briefly, Rupali, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to say this presentation was amazing. I love the idea of the bicycle as opposed to the two unicycles. I could see why the presentation was so powerful. Certainly the unity in the presentation of having the two side by side was really very clarifying. I wanted to ask actually about the spiritual leanings of both men. You can clearly see in the poems like The Lamb and The Tiger in William Blake's poetry, how he talks about the beauty as well as the innocence as well as the fury that exists in nature. And I also wanted to ask, how the scientific mind of Fuller, how did he reconcile that with that of spirituality? Because both of them were spiritual. So that is my question.
Rupali, how about Daniel answer the question and then you can comment on the education. Go
Sure.
ahead.
Thank you. It's a super deep question, and in some ways, spirituality, whatever it is the ineffable. So it cannot be firsthand nor second or third hand, which is exactly why, as Kurt posted in the chat, no more secondhand God. So both through Christianity and the cosmic personhood opened the door to an I-thou relationship and a directly personal relationship that balanced what Fuller would call system, which is minimum of 4 energy events, and system's always a subset of universe. You don't even need to say the universe. Universe is the total system that goes beyond any system. System is always subsystem. It's always tetrahedral. It's always geometric. And they both acknowledged the limitation in what has trickled down through the ancients and what trickles through our sensory doors. And they, in sometimes socially conformable or traditional ways, but in other times actually heretical ways that would have been extremely controversial, they spoke about that tension. I don't think they imagined that harmony was simply every person developing mythologies of the complexity that they developed, nor did they imagine that harmony would arise from lockstep dogma, which is played upon heavily in Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell. The angels, which Emanuel Swedenborg conversed with, they were like the rigid dogma, and they actually were propagating errors. They were propagating the causes of the following errors. Man has 2 real existing principles, a body and a soul, dualism. 2, energy called evil is from the body and reason called good is from the soul. And 3, God will torment man in eternity for following his energies. And that is from heaven. And then in hell, which Blake views, he has a different perspective. And so the theology of what they both engaged in was extremely intense, and also the really nuanced and rich way that their own ineffable traditions had kind of a meeting point with the vernacular and the cultures around them, so that they were able to share their personal journey while also exhibiting what I believe was intense respect for the Judeo-Christian and non-Judeo-Christian traditions.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. I just want to add one thing. This kind of seeming opposition of science and religion is relatively new. Like if you look at Newton, Darwin, if you look at Thomas Jefferson, people like that, for them, like nature and God were kind of synonymous. So they looked at the whole. They were all like Einstein also. He's looking at the whole, and he's saying, what is it? What is it? What is it? And that is the same for them. That's the same approach that they have towards science and trying to understand the world and God or spirituality. So they're trying to understand the whole world. They're trying to understand everything outside and everything inside. And they're open to it. And they are honestly saying, what is it about it? And they have a sense of reverence about it. They have a sense of reverence about what is out there, the nature, and what is in there, the spirit, if you will. But that just flows naturally. And that was the case for many centuries. That was the view that was there. So they did not see it as a conflicting thing. They saw it was the same thing. It is a different way of thinking about both science and religion, which is an integrative way, which focuses on the whole. And there is no this kind of Cartesian false dichotomy between the mind and the body, mind and matter. It is considered, human beings are considered to be fully natural, part of nature. And so it's just the one thing that they're looking at. And they are in awe of it, and they are almost like children. They have a childlike curiosity and interest and reverence in whatever they see outside and inside. Next, go ahead, Daniel, you want to add anything? Okay.
Yeah, it's very complex, but back to Rupali for the education, if you want to share any notes, because I'm really looking forward to that
Sure.
exploration.
Okay, next up, Rupali, go ahead. Do you want to share something about what you know about Bucky's approach to education? I don't know how much, you have been into Blake more than me, so if you have any comments about Blake, you're welcome to do that as well. Go ahead, Rupali.
Thank you. So Buckminster Fuller, Daniel, you mentioned, he thought of children as geniuses. And I'm going to be talking about Montessori and Buckminster Fuller. Now, one of the things that Buckminster Fuller does is he plays with triangles. And when you give children the tools to handle and to manipulate, then they can come up with those similar experiences. For example, if you give children triangles to play, they will make trapezoids and rhombus and hexagons, and they just explore. So that whole idea of exploration was big for him. I think that my approach is going to be through experiential learning and Montessori. For example, when he talks about the spherical, how things are more spherical, we do bubbles with children, and when they make bubbles and where the bubbles intersect, they see the planes. So I'm going to be talking about that. I'm also going to be talking about just the mathematics, the language that all comes with these experiences, that they're not just memorizing facts, but they're actually coming to their own conclusions through the experiments or through the work that they do. So that's going to be what I'm going to be talking about.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rupali. Next up is Mike. Mike, what did you think of this presentation on Blake and Bucky?
Well, several things. I really want to get into the thought processes that led Daniel to do the juxtaposition area, and how he picked the two, what thought process got to compare the two. You also mentioned Emanuel Swedenborg, and he was a Bucky type person on his own right. He started out as a Elon Musk type of mining engineer who, when he got old, decided to become a theologian. To what extent was Emmanuel perhaps did influenced Blake, but also might have influenced Bucky?
Wonderful. Thank you. Great question, Mike. Thank you. Go ahead, Daniel. So first question is why these two people? Why did you decide to juxtapose these two people?
I'll answer the second question first. So Blake extensively engaged with Swedenborg, wrote marginal comments, and had him as a character, and absolutely engaged with him, and like was it was like friends close, enemies closer with both Milton and Swedenborg. And many works have been written about Blake's complex relations with them, because he saw them as, of course, poet prophets, but also believed that they were giving the disinfo. They were part of the psyop of organized religion, because they were putting distance between what he believed the true heart of the spiritual was. And in that way, they were like, although of course it's a complex relationship, they were promoting kind of dogma. I know less, and I believe it's been written upon less, about Swedenborg's relationship with Fuller, but you made an excellent point, which is like Swedenborg's early life was patents. And I've done some reading and work into his original patents, which related to many Fullerian topics, including metallurgy and construction and communication and industrial processes. So I think that's a super fascinating connection. It's almost like Swedenborg with a left brain, right brain kind of goes and embodies differently. So that's a great thing that I'll try to follow up with Fuller and Swedenborg. Why these two? It's a great question. I can't say I'm fully sure. Both of them for a number of years, I would say roughly since high school. So in the 15-ish years, they have just endlessly enthralled me. I've never gotten tired of old or new rereadings or first-time readings of their marginalia, letters, primary content, secondary content. Then over the last few years, I wanted to look more into their biographies. So we had the Fuller biography, Adventure of the Future, which we read in Trim Tab. And then I was like, wow, like, who do I have multiple versions of their complete works of? Fuller and Blake. We're reading this Fuller biography. I want to go deep into Blake's biography. And then when I was reading that, I was like, Blake only spent 3 years outside of London, and it was only like a few hours, train ride from there. So like, he was so spatially constrained, not in a negative way, just he lived such a local, quotidian, and challenging and humble life. And Fuller was so extravagant, and he was so dramatic, and he is so much more recorded. And so just as I started juxtaposing and intercalating the scholarship and the biography with the original writings of both of them, I was just seeing more and more exciting and generative areas, not in a spirit to compare, but actually in a spirit to create. And just thinking about their juxtaposition as merely that, as one of many infinite relationalities that we can engage in, as kind of its own micro macrocosm of the way that somebody who's a plumber and somebody who likes this, it's just like, why not just make the relationality exalted and approach that from a comprehensivity, inquiry and action, striving with systems, make the world work perspective.
Wonderful. Daniel, I want to follow up with a question. Just like I asked you 2 questions in the beginning about Bucky, I'll ask you the same questions about William Blake. Keep aside the comparison. Just looking at William Blake, what do you think? Who is William Blake? Why are you interested in William Blake? And second follow-up is, what has he added to your life and thought?
All right. Who is William Blake? He was a cosmic Englishman, and he was a dedicated craftsman, and he was a consummate artist. He wrote poetry, but he also went beyond the phonemes and the syntax into the semantics, into novelty, and also into reinterpretations of what his own works were. Like, for him to be so in the game with engraving and drawing, but then see those as part of this like etching away or adding dialectic, and then for him to triangulate with the infernal method and see all of that within this mythical cosmos. He was doing hours per day in this workshop and working closely with Catherine. And so I think it's just an amazing, humble life. Not everybody is going to write Jerusalem. Not everybody's going to engrave what he engraved, but I think that his diligence and struggle for recognition and the way that like it broke his heart and like was like lifelong wounds that he received from people disparaging his exhibitions. I think it's a pattern we see in so many talented artists and craftspeople, and just the dedication that he brought to the art both made it more than art, but also made it so tangible and tactile that it's like astonishing in how it spans the most physicality and dedication and hands-on in the game and working through sickness with the most soaring abstractions and mythos. What does he add to my life and work? Well, many memes and themes and glorious illustrations, and the courage and the resonance to both be within religious tradition, religion linking back to the past, that's what it is, and that's what we've received from the ancients, but also what a qualified heterodoxy can be, and about the bastion of speech in art and poetry and prophecy, and just about an intensity of living that was across media and lifelong.
Wonderful, beautifully put. Thank you, thank you. I have not studied Blake that much, but whatever I have seen, what I see is that it is a first-hand encounter with the deepest spirituality, deepest encounter with the universal principle, universal spirit, and the world. It's like he's trying to engage all of it, and he's doing it in a very simple way. Like he's thrown away all the kind of rituals, all the cliches, and does that with this freshly minted words of his own and freshly minted visualizations of its own. So it's like first-hand encounter with nature and God, and that it just stands out in its simplicity, power, clarity, and just the grandeur of simplicity. It's like the simplest way in which to express, and it's you can see that it is him. Like just like Louis Sullivan or Leonardo da Vinci, you just kind of glance at something and say, "Oh, that's Blake." It's you can tell that it's a highly uniquely formulated, uniquely formulated art of expression of his own. So thank you. Next up is Robert. Sorry, you want to?
Oh, just one short note. Fuller, no more secondhand God. And then
no.
Blake says, I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's. It's so intense. And again, it's not for everyone to generate Jerusalem. So not everybody is so attuned to this challenge of receiving another system and generating a system, but they're both total outliers in that they engaged in inquiry and action, and they made another system with this qualified engagement with spiritual tradition.
Wonderful.
So they didn't just make a totally different lexicon, invent a new God, try to start a new religion. they brought people into the attractor of faith communities, and they promoted this heterodox, orthodox, heteropraxis, orthopraxis space that just like opens it up for us.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Next up is Robert. Robert, go ahead. Robert, go ahead.
I'm good now. First of all, I want to make a disclaimer. I saw this on the internet, so it has no veracity to it unless you care to follow it up. But what I saw was that Blake was the first cousin 8 times removed from Fuller.
I've done a little genealogical
I thought
research.
you might.
For sure, Fuller had English heritage, including the last name Blake.
Uh-huh.
Or it could have been just, it's in there. We're all relatives. Theirs may have been nearer than most, but certainly their relationship is not so much older than that between England and the United States of America.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. All right. Does anybody have any more comments that they would like to make or ask any questions? Go ahead and type exclamation mark. Let's
Mike?
go. Struppi. Struppi, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick note that I think is somewhat related to what we've just witnessed, because besides Daniel, there's a second brilliant YouTube person in our vicinity with Bucky, who also begins with DA, Dante Michael, and he's doing a YouTube channel called Scientific Genius with a lot of incredibly well edited stuff. And 2 of the videos are concerning synergetics. I sent the links to Shrikant in a private message, but I'm going to post them in the global chat too. The first one is called The Ancient Wisdom of Synergetics, and it actually does a similar thing to what you did with William Blake and Bucky, constellating Robert Flood and Bucky, and looking for the parallels in their both the respective mythologies and cosmologies and conceptions. And the other one is going in way deeper into synergetics and looking into the relationships between synergetics and quantum mechanics, and I think, or quantum physics, and I think it's like among the best pieces of work on Bucky I've seen in a very long time. And I think it deserves a shout out in so far as it is a relatively similar in many regards juxtaposition between 2 people that apparently had something in common. I mean, there is this fourfoldness and it runs deep, you know. And I don't know how many people in all of our common pasts have recognized it, but it seems that a lot of those who did recognize it for something worthwhile have grown into very fertile minds for the collective conscious, and it's remarkable to see the diverse connections between them. And I think, Daniel, you pointed this out, that it really, I was thinking while you brought up you showed your shelf, I thought it actually is a beautiful aspect of the whole Fuller universe, so to speak, that we've had this sort of, it feels to me a bit like a hiatus between Bucky's death and today, where in a way I think he comes back to life more so than he has in the decades in between, certainly to me, I have only learned about him a few years ago, and he was gone before I got here. So it feels like there's been a long stretch for a lot of the people who had been in touch with his mind, where they may have held on to, comprehensivity and synergetics and whatever, or actually have distanced themselves a little from this little Fuller in them, because they did not have the resonance and recognition in their environment. And I feel we're coming now full circle in a way, where we're bringing this all back, and we're able to integrate it with all these other traditions and perspectives, and there is so much there. And at the same time, this hiatus has been, I think, incredibly invaluable for Fuller's legacy, because it allows this polydoxy, this diversity of readings and perspectives on Fuller, without there being a dogma, without an institution in place that is regulating, that reading of Fuller, that is no-go. No. This is, we're all invited. We have been invited by Fuller himself, by Bucky himself, to play along, and play out whatever comes out. And I think that is perhaps his most profound and precious gift to us all, is that invocation of the collective playfulness, to not be bound by scripture and whatever the book says, but to open our hearts and minds and eyes to the multiplicity, the intercomplementarity of all, so that everyone can find their own place in it. And then we have this entire, wild weave of wonders to share.
Wonderful. Thank you, Struppi. So I want to add a few things here. I mean, for me, it is CJ who did that. Okay, CJ, he was a brilliant, gentle, and generous soul. Okay, what he did, I like this entire idea of everything that I'm doing. Like the core of it is, this is CJ's idea. Okay, I'm implementing it. I, Maritza, Joe, Rupali, we are implementing it, but the vision is all his. Okay, and there are several aspects of this. Okay, so one part of it is that CJ always thought Bucky inspired comprehensivity. So his mind, so firstly, partly it is who he was, who CJ was. Like he had profound respect for whoever he was talking to, and he would hear them out, even when he disagreed with them. He would hear them out, and he would engage them. He did a number of meetups on Bucky, and he thought that, look, Bucky is very complex. So instead of talking about synergetics at this level and missing everybody, he would very meticulously take one concept and build an entire essay around it, so anybody can read it beforehand, understand it. He would break it up. He says, look, and he planned everything. Okay, so it's like, first time I met him, July 4th. First time I sent email to him, July 4th, 2020, only 2.5 years ago. Like he said, okay, look, I have these 21 essays planned. Okay, and this breaks it down. Some of them are pure Bucky. Some of them are from, Harold Nelson's ideas, which go very well with that. Some of it is like these ancient cultures. I want to do something on that. Some of it is connected to literature. So he's bringing in all of it, and he plans all of it. Each of the essays and each of the meetups he did, all of them are there in our Comprehensivity series. You can watch them. He does this essay, including all kinds of references, YouTube videos, everything. It's much more well thought out than anything else I'd done. in the past for a meetup, the amount of work that he put in for it. And then during the meetup, he would make presentations and then really engage people. So that format of saying, look, it doesn't matter how complex an idea is. If I think it is worthwhile, I will put in the effort of making it accessible to anybody who wants to access it. And then I will actually engage in dialogue with them to do that. Secondly, he knew what he was strong at, what he was weak at. Like, for example, literature, he said, I don't know much about literature. So I'm going to have this entire series I'm going to do. This year, I'm going to do Dante. Next year, I'm going to do Dostoevsky. The next year, I said, I want to do Goethe. He says, yes, Goethe, but 2024. That's the earliest, because I have to do Journey through the West. I have to do this. So he would plan all of these out. But he deliberately covered areas that he was not strong at. Literature was not something he was strong at. But the way he did it is that he wrote these amazing essays on Dante, on each pieces of Dante as we went along. And then, of course, with 52 Living Ideas and Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society, so many amazing people show up. Like somebody like Doug, right? Who really is, he loves Dante, and he can actually perform Dante. Then there is this one Italian woman who says, who comes up, I'd say, please, I would like to hear what it sounds like, what Dante sounds like in Italian. She says, read for you? I can recite anything. Tell me what you want and I will recite it. I know it all. So what it does is that it brings people together and it creates a dialogue. And Dante and Bucky are not that different. Actually, you can learn a lot, just like, William Blake and Bucky are not very different. At the root, they are authentic human beings who, without any kind of limits placed on them or that they accept from people around them, they actually engage the world and engage everybody around them through their work, through their interaction. Person after person who had actually seen Bucky always talks of this 14-hour seminar that they were at, where Bucky just kept speaking. So what it speaks to is the importance of collaboration, importance of talking to each other. And what CJ ended up doing is that in our Comprehensivist Wednesdays series, he built that on a scale. He set the bar himself, not enforcing it, but just through his own example, he sets how much work can you do? How much can you actually try to show people? Okay, don't go at a low level of just saying something for the sake of saying it. Say what's the best thing you can offer people, and how much work can you do to make it accessible to everybody, and then be open, generous, kind to people so that they all engage. And when you find somebody who is good, you say they're good and invite them to do more. It's a collaboration. It's a collaboration. And that, partly, I have those characteristics of wanting to talk to people all the time and wanting to see what people have to say. And if I notice that somebody, Struppi showed up and I said, look, this guy knows something. So I said, Struppi, what can you do with tetrahedron? And then he started participating. Similarly, CJ was exactly like that. Okay. But he had a vision, when he found out he had cancer, the first thought on his mind and the thing that he kept on focusing on was, I want to build this collaborating for comprehensivity. I want this to go on. And That's what he focused on. And he gave me the crucial pieces, like the names of people that he thought I should contact. This idea of the 4 on-ramps, the idea that we should do it, that we should focus on comprehensivity all the time, but Bucky inspired the idea that create a forum where everybody who has been working on Bucky, no matter how isolated they are from the world, no matter how isolated they are from each other, no matter what group they are part of, invite everybody. Not just that, but anybody who is Bucky adjacent, like anybody who has been inspired by Bucky and has done some really good work, or anybody whose work is consonant with Bucky, like the Design Way by Harold Nelson. That's consonant with Bucky, and you bring all of that together. That's what CJ did. So this entire thing that Struppi, you're talking about, that you're admiring, much of it is CJ. Little bit of it is me, Maritza, and Joe doing it. We are doing some things. I'm not saying that we are not doing anything, but like the vision of it, example of it, and I mean, that's the power of ideas, right? We are discussing Bucky now. We're discussing William Blake. William Blake is gone long, century ago. And Bucky is gone, few decades ago. But what happens is that their ideas have the power. They have engaged us and provided us with an example. That really, I think the greatest thing one human being can do for another is be an example. Because that's the greatest thing you can do. Show people what is possible. That's what Bucky did. Okay? That's what William Blake did, and that's what CJ did. And the kind of impact that has is something else. So thank you. So it's going to be Daniel followed by Struppi. Daniel.
Thanks. There's really so much to add and say, so it can't all be said, but CJ gave me so many positive and helpful comments. Mm-hmm. And what neither Fuller nor Blake could do, they could both talk for 14 hours, but could they create a space for others for 14 hours? And that's a level of commitment and distributed embodiment that CJ was and is.
Thank you, Daniel. Struppi, and if anybody else wants to comment on CJ and what he has brought to this venture, because this is CJ's idea. Okay, this is what we are doing. It's 100 meetups, and the entire context, the vision, even the how it is being done is all all set by him. So any comments that you have about that? So we're going to go with Struppi followed by Richard. Struppi.
Well, actually, I was gonna try to end a long ago begun cycle, because just before we began the recording of this session, Daniel asked me a question to open it, and I have only written some words in response, but I haven't spoken them, and maybe I would suggest or offer them as a conclusion to the whole.
Absolutely. So we'll come to
rather
you
after. Yes.
Sounds good. Next up is Richard.
Yes. Well, I had one thing and now I have two things. Talking about CJ. CJ was part of the TrimTeb group for a few sessions last year. Last year in 2021. And he asked some questions about some of the things he was presenting, and I responded with a point of view or a comment, and I shared something of what I was interested in doing out of my discipline, and it was almost immediate that he shifted towards me and what my interest was. He even dug in deeper to a subject area that he was not totally familiar with, my profession of social work. And he spent the next 2 or 3 days in exchange trying to not only help me articulate what I was thinking about and how I might advance it, but also engaging in how important it was for him to learn something about that. So, I mean, everything we've all said about him being open and sharing and generous and devoted to not only his own mission, but to whatever the mission is of somebody else, he would take the time to listen and pay attention to. And just like Daniel said, the others might be able to talk for 14 or 24 hours, but I think CJ was the epitome of being able to stop and let go of his own agenda and lean into whatever your agenda was in a very respectful and sincere way. So that's the impact that CJ's had on me just in 1 year of kind of knowing him. The other one I did want to comment on was this question of ontology, and it just reminded me that the Buckminster Fuller Institute and all of those associated with the Institute and others connected to his work are wanting to continue that legacy, just as Struppi was talking about. And that's what's happening in the Perry Center in Italy, a small village in Italy, where contemporaries of David Bohm, in particular David Peat, who was a physicist as well, are trying to extend his legacy. And they have sessions like this one and others with invited guests. And so, and this is a question, I guess, through to Danielle, whether he's connected to or has ever wondered about the connection between Bohm and Fuller and Bohm's ideas of undivided world ontology. So I just throw that out as part of our ending of our session today.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Thank you. In our closing round, I've noted it, Richard, and let's continue the discussion. I'm always up for ontology mix-up.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Next up is Maritza. Maritza, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to briefly comment on the, how we are shaped here today by CJ and his works and thoughts. And, it truly does feel like I'm getting to meet all these great people, all of you, because, CJ is reaching out and saying, it reminds me of one of the many emails we used to get from him. And many of us here today can have probably had this happen where he'll see something and he'll write you this long email going, I read this thing and it made me think of this other thing. And I really think that you would love to delve deeper into this topic. And he'll give you 3 websites, a course, and maybe 2 books that you should read just to wet your feet on this topic that made him think of you. And I really feel him doing that here for us with this series. Like even, Shrikant said, he did such a, when he first learned he was ill, he kind of told us as an aside. He sent an email to myself, Shrikant, and Joe, and it was like the fact that he was ill was an aside. He was like, but I have these concepts and I'm feeling this urgency now to set this up, this collaboration for comprehensivity. And he gave us the guidelines and he proceeded to just keep everything. So we showed excitement. We're like, oh, this is a great idea. We should do this. He's like, oh, you guys make a good point. And he would pivot and give like a whole new set of directions. Anytime we gave him a suggestion, he would tweak his original thinking. And you could almost see his mind working like in real time. And I have this feeling that he saw most of this. Like we think that we're shaping this series, but there's a part of me that is half convinced that, at some point, Genie's going to find a piece of paper meticulously written where he has all of these sessions already mapped out to 2025. Like he didn't get time to tell us about it, but he already had it sketched out. But that's kind of the way I feel. But, on a slightly more, a deeper note here is that the beauty of, and I think someone else mentioned here a little earlier, that we're bringing, it's almost like a revival. It feels like there are so many people here who have walked with Bucky concepts for many, many years. And here, so many of you weren't aware of the other folks with whom CJ had in fact interacted, who were walking with Bucky, but understanding Bucky in a slightly different way. And so we get the pleasure of coming together because, you know, and I put this in the chat, CJ is the fulcrum. So all of us are kind of converging here. And I mean, me specifically, because, you know, I'm more of a novice compared to many of you. You know, I only been walking this past maybe 6 years, but the idea of the richness, you know, multiple perspectives and multiple hypotheses, you know, those could be just words, but they were never just words to CJ. CJ truly believed that the more perspectives you could get, the greater understanding we could hope to achieve. Or if not, it would give us more points to view and to follow, to seek even broader understanding. And so what we have here is the delightfulness of human points that are brought to us by CJ. So, you know, I think that it's almost impossible for us to, you know, conceive of this series without acknowledging that so much of it is shaped through him. And, you know, obviously collaborating for comprehensivity is his phrase. You know, and, you know, he even corrected Shrikant. I don't know if any of you guys realized that the very, very first one we did, there was a title and the title changed within a few hours. And that's because CJ saw it and sent an email within a few hours of it being posted going, you know, I was chewing on that and I was thinking, and he gave 4 bullet points in this email as to why he thought Shrikant should change the name. So naturally, really hard to come up, unless you could come up with 6 bullet points in the contra, you kind of agreed. And he was right. So Bucky inspired collaboration for comprehensivity. It's what we're calling it. And I love the idea that it invites us to do exactly what Daniel here has done with his slides, this invitation to see where else can we take these concepts that are almost seemingly abstract. Where can we concretize them? Where can we find other aspects of them throughout the ages, throughout our history, that will help us bring it more into the real? And so that's what I see us doing here through all these different walks. Like, you know, if any of you have attended and had the pleasure of seeing some of Struppi's presentations, there's this manner of just making everything so real that I really appreciate. And, you know, for me specifically, it takes it out of the realm of this is, you know, more philosophizing and into the world of this is something I'm going to grab onto and walk forward with as I'm seeking my meaningful path in life. I'm going to take this with me. And I think, to me, that's what this collaborating for comprehensivity is beginning to mean. It's the meaning of, let's look at these concepts and let's find a way to internalize them. And through internalizing them, we will do as CJ and just walk with them with such intensity that it shines around you and touches everyone else, not because you're telling them that they should, you know, get into Bucky, but because you are living with these concepts concretized within your own principles and value system, and walking forward with such intent and such light that those of us in the periphery can't help but want to figure out how we too can walk some path in with that similar intent and purpose. Sorry for taking so long. Thank you, Shrikant.
Oh, this is wonderful. I have one anecdote about this, but I'm going to have Struppi go first, and then I'll close with this anecdote. Struppi, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to take this last thread up because it was the first for me when I got here, because Daniel asked me before we started. I think the question was, could you repeat it? That's better.
Something like, how can we center ourselves? How can we bring ourselves to the center?
Yeah, I think you asked something along the lines of what is the shortest way to the center of the sphere or something. And I was thinking, and my first intuition was to say in, the shortest way is in, because we all are spheres and we all have a center at our heart. And the second, and I think more profound perhaps, answer is that the next shortest way is to go out and meet another, because meeting another heart doesn't take all the way into their heart, because they come towards us and we can meet in the middle. So the shortest way to meet another heart is to go out and meet them halfway.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Struppi. Now I want to close with this anecdote. As Maritza was saying, CJ would have all these ideas. Okay. And it would be ideas. He would be thinking of everybody. He would be saying, oh, this is something that Maritza should do. This is something that Shrikant should do. This is something that Joe should do. And he would actually reach out to people. So I remember once he reached out to Maritza and say, oh, you need to do something on these Aborigines in Australia. Because they have all these methods and you have tremendous amount of interest in it. And so you should do a meetup on Aborigines. So Maritza said, oh, yes, I'm very excited. So I scheduled the meetup for Maritza on Aborigines. And we started the meetup, and this person shows up from Australia who's been working with Aborigines for like 2 decades. And he was so amazing. Like he had actually worked with these folks, and everything that Maritza was saying, he had actually done it and actually saw these people. So we basically handed over the meetup to him and say, hey, you are very good. Please tell us more. And that is the power of synergy. Okay. That now remember, CJ was not at the meetup, because he's very, very methodical. He says, I will watch it afterwards, but I have my schedule and these are the things that I'm going to do. But by saying that, okay, Aborigines is a very important part of the world culture, and we want to bring that into the conversation of comprehensivity. Maritza is a person who's really, really interested in these cultures. So I will reach out to her. And then Maritza does this, and this person shows up. So suddenly we have connected the Comprehensivist Wednesdays in a much more deeper way. The other thing that CJ wanted from these series, though we have not made it explicit, I expect that this has already begun to happen, is that what he was saying was that, there are all these people working using Bucky's ideas and are building on it, and he was very supportive of people. Okay, like I went and interviewed Tom Miller, and he says, I said, Tom, can we, I would love to do this meetup. And Tom said, I'm a very private person. I don't know how it will be like. But CJ was the one who encouraged me when I was just starting out. If it was not for his encouragement throughout, I would not have done what I have done. So sure, tell me what you want me to do. I will do it, because, CJ wanted me to. CJ thought of me. He said that, look, you have to, because he had told me, like, you have to go and talk to Tom. So he said, oh, CJ has asked it, so I will do it. Okay. Now, one thing that happened, so I want to back up and say, one of the things that CJ was hoping to accomplish with this is to give floor to everybody who's been working on CJ, so they get more exposure, they get better connected with people where they can do more work, they can collaborate more, open up the applications for everybody. So increase the opportunities for everybody, not only through collaboration, but for, it's actually being able to do more work with the world. So for example, Tom, he had started by, when I met him, I just loved his website. He sent me his website, which was still in development. And he said, there is a lot of things that I need to correct and check. So it'll take at least a month or so. And then I will, and then as I was doing the interview, he said, okay, now I'm going to do it within a week. Oh, I'm going to do it this week. And the next day after the interview, he published the website. And now we're going to go ahead and have him walk through the website. So what we are trying to do here, in addition to us folks, okay, like me, Maritza, Joe, and Rupali, we are babies, okay? We are just trying to just learning about. I mean, I'm not saying this in a derogatory way. I'm saying babies, that's good. So we have the curiosity, we know that we know very little. So we're trying to learn, okay? We're trying to learn. We're trying our best, okay? We will make lots of mistakes, okay? But we'll fall down many times, okay? And that's okay. And we don't mind that. We do this all the time. So, but that is us. It does multiple things. So firstly, we want, people like Tom to have a better, much larger influence, much more quickly, because that is the actual way in which the world will be changed. CJ was very serious, comprehensive to understand and change the world. He was the one who said, you have to include change the world, okay? You can't just say understand the world. You just can't say comprehensivity. This is something that Bucky was very big on, that these ideas are not only good, but they are effective and they make world better. And you should do whatever you can to make that happen. So that is one thing that is there at the back of our minds whenever we are doing this. So we're doing it all together. The other thing I want to tell you is that we're just getting started. We have done this for many, many different areas. We've done this for Tao Te Ching. We've done this for Bhagavad Gita. We've done it for Louis Sullivan. We've done it for Design Way. We've done it for Gospel of John. So wide variety of fields, okay? Whatever you're seeing now, a year from now, you will think, oh, we used to just do this. Okay, I love this, by the way. I love this. But what I'm saying is that slowly, everybody is going to keep learning. And everybody is going to learn to look at things from so many different angles that the level of comments, level of presentations, everything is going to go up. All the presenters are going to cross-pollinate, and their ideas are going to become more and more. People will say, oh, I can do this. I can do this. We're starting out deliberately with fairly basic things. There is a lot that can be built. And the great thing is that Bucky has actually gone ahead and built a lot more that can be taken in just by beginners. So we will be able to make things accessible which were not accessible because people do not have the context. We're building the whole thing out, okay? That's what we want to do. And please give us feedback. Okay, my email address is 52livingideas@gmail.com. You can send me a message on meetups. I keep talking to Maritza, Joe, and Rupali whenever I'm not sure whether I'm doing something right or wrong. And periodically I keep talking to them and tell me what we are doing wrong and tell me what we are doing right. And I invite you to do that Okay, I would love, we are very open to feedback. It's not that we will agree with everything that is said. We will evaluate what is being said, but we would love to hear from you. Anybody who's out there whom I've not already approached, if you're watching this video, if you are doing work based on Bucky or that is related to Bucky, please reach out to us and we would love to have you present. It doesn't have to be a full-fledged presentation. I'm going to introduce, thanks to Kirby, I like the name Lightning Talks. We'll have lightning talks so you can take baby steps into making presentations. Most important thing is that the more you speak, the more you learn. Learning is not a passive process. You need to get your hands in, just like Struppi is showing by doing things like this. Same thing applies to speaking. You listen and you speak and you listen. That it's like breathing in and breathing out. If you just try to breathe in, it wouldn't work. You need to breathe out too. And if you just try to breathe out, that wouldn't work too. So and the thing is that we are actually interacting with one another at a very deep level. And I think we're going to learn a lot from each other. So thank you so much. Really wonderful to have all of you here. I'm just honored to have. I'm tremendously grateful to each and every one of you. And thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate you. And thank you, everybody. Good night. Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.